Welcome to Fun with Annuities, where every single week I welcome a celebrity guest expert that can help you maximize Chapter 2 of your life. Listen, learn, laugh, and love every minute of the most unique financial podcast on the planet. Let's get to it. Welcome to Fun with Annuities. I'm your host, Stan, the Annuity Man, America's Annuity Agent. Yes, you are correct. I am licensed in all 50 states. Have a repeat guest, a good friend of mine, newly married. So if you're watching this on the Fun with Annuities YouTube channel and wondering where that glow is coming from, that's from Chuck's newlywedness, right? This is who I'm talking to is Chuck Jaffe. He is the host of Money Life. If you go to moneylifeshow.com, please check out all the repeats and the podcast and all the stuff. He's one of the best in the business, has been a columnist at Market Watch and other places for a long, long time. You probably have read his stuff if you are in the money world at all and trying to care about your retirement. So with that, welcome, newlywed Chuck Jaffe.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And yeah, I can't stop smiling, so it's a good thing.
It's the permagrin, and for people like me who's been married 35 years and all the people that are watching and listening, they're like, come on, Chuck, you're killing me, man. But that's good. No, that's good. So let's jump right in. I mean, when I get you on the show, we have fun and we laugh and we giggle but I really do want to hear what you have to say, and we're going to be all over the board. And as I told you before we started, let's just freeform this thing because that's how we typically do. Let's weigh in on elections, politics, and all that stuff, and your predictions on maybe what's going to happen to the markets and money, and what you're telling people at this point in time. Even though at the time of this taping, we're pre-presidential election.
Yeah. Hard to know a whole lot about what's going on right now. That's for sure. But there is a few things that we definitely do know, not the least of which is that ultimately election years are pretty benign for the market. This one is likely to be as well, at least until the end of it, because you're going to go through. I mean, it's very interesting to me that someone like Bob Dahl, former Merrill Lynch chief investment officer, now with Crossmark Global, he's the CEO there.
Right.
In his 10 forecasts for the year, the last one is always political. And he said, we're going to see a flip in the White House, the Senate, and Congress. He said all of them would flip.
Really?
And that's the most extreme that I've heard, but it's coming from a guy who's never extreme. Like, that's not his norm. So I have to say, I don't know how this could go.
Yeah.
But I think that the impact of the election will be much less on the market and the economy right now than the impact of the Fed. I mean, the bond market is pricing in 6 bond rate cuts this year. 6. That's what the bond market is pricing in. I don't know a single person, and I interview people every single day. I do not have a single expert who I've talked to who said 6, that's my number. I've had a couple of people say, yeah, maybe you could get to 5, but I think it's more likely 4. So there is clearly a disconnect between what the market is expecting and what the Fed is going to do. And as much as we love to see the market at record highs, I will just point out, if I were Jerome Powell, and no, I do not bear any resemblance to him, and more importantly, I do not want his job.
There you go.
But if I were Jerome Powell, a market being at record highs tells me I can wait longer before I start cutting rates. And that, while you'd think it's, okay, that's, the market's at record highs, that's good, but that's not necessarily good in terms of the economy. You're going to have those rate cuts for the economy to kind of say, oh, let's get growth back in.
Yeah, it's interesting, having been through a lot of these cycles just like you. Typically, and what I've seen when I was with Dean Wooders and Morgan Stanley's and Payne Weber's and UBS, is not a lot of activity during that year of the election. It's typically static. There's not a lot happening after the elections, and things kind of happen. So for people to be calling for 6 rate cuts, that's a lot, man. I don't know. I might have to take the under on that one.
Yeah, no, I don't see it. I really don't
see it, man. I don't see it.
But again, so let's look back at the last couple of years, Stan, right? Because in 2022, every forecast for the year was wrong. No matter who
Yeah.
you talk to there. I look
Yeah.
now you had people who said, "Oh, it's going to be a bad year on the market," and they were correct about it. But nobody said the market's going to peak on January the 3rd and then it's going to go down ever since. So the way the market went down in 2022 made everybody wrong. Then we got to 2023, and every outlook for 2023 was also wrong. But
Hmm.
they were wrong for different reasons. In 2023, every forecaster was saying we're either going to see a landing, hard or soft, we'll see a recession, we'll see some sort of an event. And the market put all of that off. So now you get to this year, and they'll probably be right, the outlooks that we've been hearing, but they'll probably be right for the wrong reasons. In other words, they're right because everybody went benign, and this market likely will be fairly benign. That's it. You can't make a case that, like, wow, the market's going to go gangbusters. That would be a surprise. You could make a case that there could be some trouble. Ultimately, what does that mean? It means we're going to probably have some volatility, and then we'll see what we scratch out. And the end of the year may determine it. Like, we could be positive until election day and then watch the end of the year tank it out a little bit. And then next year is going to be the really crucial one because you will have whatever the new power structure is. And you will have a situation where there's enough talk of what's being done that if you give anyone any credit for what is happening, like that politics matters,
Sure.
and the question becomes, do you stop what's going on or not? And let us just point out, without getting too political, because I'm not really the guy to talk partisan politics with.
Me neither. Yeah,
I'm a
me neither.
centrist.
Yeah.
But without getting too political, there's a huge disconnect in this country right now between like how we feel and how we're actually doing, right? Just this week, and as we're recording this, it's the third week of January, just in case somebody's listening to it at a later
Yeah.
date.
Yeah. It's going to come out next week, so it's
We
pretty
got
timely.
we got great consumer confidence news. Yet, if you talk to anybody about what they're spending at the grocery store, about what they're spending at the gas pump, or God forbid, because you can put me in this realm, my homeowner's insurance bill is due,
Hmm.
and it is up 39.6% from a year ago. Like, you can talk about inflation all you want, 5% inflation, ooh, it's been high. 39% increase in a year. No claims history, no nothing that should drive it other than if something happens to my house, they're going to have to pay a lot more. Everyone is complaining about their consumer experience. And yet, you don't know anybody who really wants to be employed who can't find a job right now because we're at full employment.
Yeah. Yeah, but, and I'm going to step in here coming from rural America. I read an article recently about the bankless society that we're in. The 60% of the people in the world and adults in the United States, excuse me, have less than $400 in their checking account. A vast majority, at least up to one third, more than that in some cases, don't have a bank account, or a checking account or a savings account. So they're literally carrying their net worth in their right pocket. So I think that the people that are listening to this podcast are obviously wanting to hear what you have to say. And by the way, we're talking to Chuck Jaffe. He's the host of Money Life, moneylifeshow.com. If you want to go there, read his articles and columns at marketwatch.com. He's fantastic. Been doing this a long, long time. It's great insight. But my point is, we are talking to a bubble. So I always tell my clients that, remember, when you're on the highway, 6 out of 10 people can't, if they wreck their car, they couldn't fix it. So might not want to flip those people off, but those are also called voters. And I do think that's the angst part that people like us forget about a lot of times, is that, let's just say it's a 50% number of people that are just living on the edge literally every day, regardless of how much they're making. And there's arguments for that, but politically, there's no good answers to that. But it also explains how politicians and why politicians say the things they do and talk how they talk.
Well, but
So,
we have a K-shaped recovery, right? That's what we're
right.
really seeing is so a K-shaped recovery. Imagine a K where you've got one part that comes up, one part that goes down. So the haves are getting more and the have-nots are not getting more or getting less, et cetera. The problem from a political standpoint is that the have-nots are much less active politically, much less
Mhm.
likely to vote. But the oddity of the current economy is that the haves actually feel like they're have-nots.
I know.
I'm amazed when I talk to people because I'll engage on either side. I'm happy to take up
Uh-huh.
whatever debate we want to have.
Sure.
And I'll engage on either side and I'll get people who will talk about how miserable the economy is. And I'll say, how is it miserable for you? Like, give me a specific where you are going, this is my terrible thing. And then size it up because I can bitch at the gas pump as much as anybody. But in
Mhm.
my case, because I work from home and I do whatever, I go through a tank of gas maybe once every 3 weeks when
Right.
I'm busy. So I can complain and it's really noticeable. Oh, I haven't been to the gas pump for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And now the price is up 20 cents or whatever. But I can't tell you, like, that's not make or break for me because that's $12. Now the 39.6% increase in my home insurance, that's more than the stimulus check the government gave me during COVID. So that's a lot more. That's a different scenario. But the vast majority of people who are complaining, their complaints are not necessarily their own. And that's the interesting side. Look, if you're in
Or
that part that's unbanked, the question would be, were you were you better off in any other administration? The answer is probably not.
right.
And therefore you're proving the point that the politics don't make the market, that it's something else. And it's not like, quite honestly, I don't really blame politicians much for inflation. I will say, people have asked me, I do believe that whoever wins this next election is going to be saddled with a recession. I don't think they're going to avoid it. It may not be a bad one, but they're going to be saddled with a recession. And oh, by the way, I would have told you the same thing in 2016, and we managed to avoid a recession until 2020. And that was some good politicking, even if you don't necessarily like the person who was doing that politicking. But as a general rule, I don't give much credit, good, bad, or otherwise, because it may have been good politicking. It may have been left over from the guy before him, whatever. So,
Yeah, and I have conversations with clients all the time that they'll be upset about inflation and they'll have $7 million investable, and I'm like, you're the most arrogant person I know, and I'm one of the most arrogant people on the planet probably. But listen, you can buy the eggs, you can buy the gas, but inflation, if you have seven figures or more, probably isn't going to hit you. And if you're obsessed about it, then you need to probably get medicated a little bit. Because and I know people are on this going, Stan, I hate you. Please stop talking like that. You don't understand. No, actually, I do understand. And it is called math. And I do think inflation hits that lower end hard. But for the people on this podcast, in most cases, yes, it's annoying. Inflation's like a fly that's flying around your head, and you can't catch it, and it keeps landing on your ear. Eventually, you're going to catch it. It's going to go away, whatever. And I do think people, and I blame the media for punching the inflation bag too many times, because the people they're talking to aren't the people that it's really hitting. The people that are really hitting aren't watching cable news or reading Wall Street Journal. So I have a big bugaboo about people upset about inflation, because the people that are upset about inflation most likely have a lot of money, and they're just trying to navigate that speed bump. I don't know if you run into that with your callers or not, but boy, I do with my people. And I'm like, inflation. I'm like, what's like playoffs? I'm like, inflation? What are you talking about, man?
well, I think like I said, inflation's real. I can
I
complain, but
agree.
I can't say I can't afford it. And I think I think it brings up some good stuff that we can get to on the annuity side and the savings side as well.
Sure.
At the end of every show, my tagline at the end of each day is, until we do this again the next time, remember that the best thing you could do for your money is not worry too much about it,
It's
right?
true.
Like, keep it in perspective. And for those folks who have that amount of money, the thing that I worry about with the guy who's complaining at $7 million,
Yeah.
who's worried about inflation,
Right.
I do not worry that that person's seriously going to be impacted by inflation. But what is making that person's life significantly less is their own money mindset.
Hmm.
Because if they're worried about inflation at that point, look, if you've made that much money, you are entitled to spend it however you want. And you should
Absolutely.
make your life as nice as you can. And I can't tell you the number of people who are in my audience, and I'm sure you have some in yours too, who will tell you that they have problems spending money. Not like
Oh
going to
yeah.
the grocery store paying inflation. It's I go to book an airline flight and it's $28 cheaper to take the flight that stops in Baltimore and then Charlotte before I get to my destination or whatever. And I can't bring myself to do it. Or, I've been having problems with my hip and I don't want to spend an extra
Right.
$300 to fly first class. When all of this is de minimis amounts
Right.
when it comes to what they're going to get to. And by the way, this is a huge part of the planning industry. Like you and I can talk about when people make their planning assessments and their planning adjustments and what they're thinking about.
Right.
And the financial planning industry, like with the whole 4% rule, right? Don't amass enough money so that you're living off of 4%.
Right.
That is a great rule for the financial advisor who gets you to follow it. Because
totally agree. Because it's been debunked so many times. I mean, come on. I agree. I agree with that. I think that it's hard to tell people. My wife calls it the scars of scarcity, and I think that's the best phrase I've ever heard, because we all have scars from when we had no money in the past, or when our parents had no money in the past, and now we have money and we still have those scars. We all can tell those stories. A specific story. I have one in my head that I've told before, and every time I tell it, I cry, about when we were newly married with one kid, and I had to go buy baby food on a credit card. I mean, that'll make you cry. That's a scar of scarcity. Everyone out there listening and watching has a scar of scarcity. But what I'm encouraging people to do is not bring that scar with you to your current state. I always tell people, you can afford the eggs and you can buy the gas, you're good. You're fine. You can fly first class. I always tell my clients, fly first class, your kids will. It's your call, And so I'm trying out here to talk about lifestyle. Chapter 2 is all about you. Chapter 2 is about living your life. And we're all at the age now where we have friends and colleagues that drop dead. And not to be morbid, but one of the reasons I do these podcasts and the videos is to remind people, let's spend it. You can't take it with you. There's no U-Hauls behind hearses. So, that's what I love about your show. You give solutions, but it's not life or death. Inflation's not life or death. Politics is not life or death. Even if we have a black swan event, we're going to get through it.
In 2010, I lost my brother, who at the time was 57 years old, and just sort of won the evil lottery and got a disease. And a few months after that, I had a heart attack. So those things will change some of your perspective. Mm-hmm. And what I had always told my kids, what my parents told me, is don't expect an inheritance, go do your thing. And the right thing should happen. And yeah, you may get a little bit lucky and whatever. That's what I'm telling my kids. Go live your life, because my only promise to my kids is I will not go broke until the day after I die. In other words, we'll be able to pay all my bills and do everything else. There may not be anything left for you, but I promise not to outlive my money. And that does not take, the funny side is, all of this is about math, and you mm-hmm. get it in the annuity side, that everything's about, how scary is the math? Simple examples, credit card debt. Mm-hmm. Right? If you pay the minimum, they'll say, okay, well, if you've got the minimum, if you've got the average credit card balance and you pay the minimum, it's going to take you 17 years to pay it off. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing. Let's say that your minimum payment that first month is $100. You pay the minimum. Now your minimum payment is $99.25. Right. And then in the next month, it's $98.75 and whatever. And your minimum comes down. If you could afford to pay $100, your minimum this month, and you just kept paying $100 as your minimum goes down, but you stick with $100 because you could afford it, then instead of taking you 17 and a half years, it'll take you about 6. Is that great? Is that great? No, but you can plan on that. You don't have to look at 6 years and go, oh my God, any setback will be horrible for me. I'll never get out of debt. The same thing when it comes to savings. When it comes to savings and you're looking at the 4% rule or what have you, you have to save way more money to make sure that you never run out of money. When you can take a realistic look at what you're spending and what you hope to spend. And I mean, look, I love scars of scarcity. I want to keep that and remember that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm somebody who loves to cook. And I will tell you that my menu is decided pretty much every single week based on what's on sale at the grocery store. Now, that's not because, oh my God, I'm being cheap. No, it's just that if I'm going to buy myself really good steak, I'm going to buy it when it's on sale because the rest of the time I can eat chicken or do whatever else I want and eat really well. I can't stop myself from saving the money. I then spend that money on something else. So I try not to make it that like it's scars of scarcity. Let's go back to the days when, ooh, ramen, a treat and 40 cents.
And we've all
You know,
been there.
and we've all been there.
Unless you're an inheritance baby, we've all been there. All of
Yeah.
us.
And even if you were an inheritance baby, if your parents did it right, you still had to go through some period. So, for me, it's much more about conscious spending. What I dislike about inflation and where bringing this back to that side of things is that, I have no problems paying my insurance bill, but it's kind of like, what Arthur Godfrey said about taxes in the United States. Arthur Godfrey said, I'm proud to pay taxes to the United States of America, but I could be just as proud for half the money. Right. I love that, like there's nothing better than going, ooh, I paid my insurance bill. I don't have to worry about that. I did this, I did that. I love paying off my bills. I love being like, yep, everything's going well. I'm right where I'm supposed to be. But I could be just as happy with a little bit less money going out the door for that stuff. So that's how you wind up with inflation. Really? 39
inflation's living in people's heads for free, and it shouldn't be living there in a lot of cases. What are your guests and callers saying? What's the concerns that keep coming up or that have surprised you recently?
Oh, I don't know that there's any that have surprised me. I think that the interesting thing is how willing everyone is to believe that the consumer can keep going. So if you take a look at all of the things that had people saying in 2023, we expect recession, they were actually things on which we were kind of early, like an inverted yield curve, which we still have, right? An inverted yield curve normally takes 18 to 24 months before it really comes to roost. So couple that with the high interest rates that we've had. What happens when interest rates go high? You get more defaults, but we haven't seen more defaults.
They're creeping. They're starting to creep. The delinquencies are starting to creep in.
Exactly right. We're starting to see numbers that show that, consumers are under stress.
Yeah.
We're seeing numbers that say there's record credit card debt, and credit card debt is at record high levels of interest rates.
Correct.
But it hasn't stopped consumers yet. Everyone's talking about, well, with these high rates, nobody can get a mortgage. Well, not that many people need them. I know they do, and that's overstating it. But the fact is, we're now at a spot in this country where when couples are separating, they're not fighting about who gets to keep the house. They're fighting about who gets to keep the mortgage. Because the mortgage is a 3% mortgage from X number of years ago. And like, I may not want the house, but I want the document because that's cheap money that I can't get someplace else.
And that falls under, I used to love you, but I love the low rates more.
I'm not sure, but I know that I know that anybody who has, like, as someone who could be looking, because I just got married, my wife and I are talking about where we want to be living and what we want to do going forward. I will not say that my mortgage is like a golden handcuff to the house, but the math works very differently now with me having a low rate mortgage and looking at something that would be much higher, et cetera. So it makes me say, okay, what situation do we want? And we're not quite ready to move to a lower cost area of the country where we go, oh, who needs a mortgage or whatever? But we're close. And so it changes the conversations and it changes the numbers. But again, the things that we haven't seen happen yet, there has been no wave of defaults, not at any level. We haven't seen junk bonds have a wave of defaults. We haven't seen creditors have a wave of defaults. We only have to go back 6-7 years. We had municipalities that were on the wave of default.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Puerto Rico bonds and Chicago bonds and Detroit bonds and whatever else were all in trouble. All that problem has, quote unquote, gone away. And remember, we're less than a year removed from Silicon Valley Bank and problems there. Now, the one that would worry me, if you want the scary one is how many banks have a significant amount of paper out on commercial real estate.
Yes,
And if you can't solve the commercial real estate problem, could you have a wave of bank failures? You could.
you could.
And at the same time, and let's point out, I just had a guest on the January 24th edition of Money Life. Anat Admati, she's a Stanford University professor who wrote a book that
By the way, moneylifeshow.com.
So she wrote a book called The Banker's New Clothes.
Okay.
Here it is here because I just happen to have it handy. And it's what's wrong with banking and what to do about it. And one of the things that she points out, and I strongly believe that this is right, is that, we keep saying, oh, this bank is too big to fail. And, oh, you didn't follow FDIC insurance things, but we'll insure you anyway, et cetera. All of that is incentivizing bad behavior.
Of course.
And so we can't get rid of the bank failures until we tell the banks, oh, we're going to let some of you fail. Like, guess what? You're in trouble and we're going to let you go down. And,
politicians then get in the way because now you have voters and blah, blah, blah. And that's the problem is someone's got to pay the bill, and
Well,
it's just, all of this has got to come home to roost eventually. You and I both know that. We're just waiting on it.
So that's your worry scenario. The worry scenario is there are plenty of things out there that had people saying we were going to have a hard landing. None of that has been repealed, right? None of that. There's no guarantee. We've just seen enough things happen. And remember that everything that we've seen happen was coming out of a COVID environment. And it's not just COVID and the long side of it. We had a recession in 3 months, right? Go back. They actually consider that a recession. But they don't consider what we were seeing like at the end of last year, where we had 6 months of negative GDP growth or whatever. That's a classic definition of a recession with a few other things thrown in. They weren't willing to call that a recession, yet the COVID drop down spike they called a recession. It messed up numbers, not just during COVID, but then what are your year over year comps and what are your whatever comps? And,
right.
Oh, this looks good, but where is it relative to pre-COVID levels versus post-COVID levels? There's a lot of stuff out there that the worry to me, the odd case, is the one that says, yeah, there's still plenty of trouble. We got to work it out.
Are you bullish on the stock market?
Always, because my time horizon is long-term.
Bullish on the bond market?
Right now, I am. I believe that fixed income has been fixed. It's generating a return for you. But I think that people want to try to make sure that they're getting their returns from a couple of different places. And remember your time horizon. At this point, if all you're worried about is a safe haven, you can do reasonably well in bank accounts.
Sure.
But you're going to face a lot of reinvestment risk. And that's, I think, what we're going to start to see now. Once rate cuts happen.
Yeah.
Right? Once we see, I don't know, is the yield curve disinverting, uninverting, whatever. The yield curve goes back to like being a curve.
Sounds like a great jazz album, disinverting of the uninverted. Whoever that is.
Disinverting the yield curve sounds like somebody's next album.
That's like Miles Davis, the lost album.
Exactly. That's
disinverting the yield curve. But yeah, I think that I think we're all kind of waiting on whatever shoe to drop, whatever that shoe to drop is, because there's so much happening. And I know there's always things happening if you go back, but couple wars and crazy election, and I don't know. It's just my clients, the flight to safety has been unbelievable in the annuity industry, because not only can you get lifetime income products at very good payout rates, but you can also get guaranteed interest rate products too that people have been flocking to, that combine with treasuries and combine with CDs and combine with quality bonds for a fixed income portfolio. I think the savers are winning here, and after decades of them getting hammered, I'm pulling for them.
Yeah.
But I'm also telling them it ain't gonna be here forever, player, because we have to service the debt, which means they're gonna have to lower these interest rates, period.
Here's a question for you with regard to what you're seeing from those savers, which is, as the rate environment has changed, have some of the people who are now turning to you for annuities, were they not coming to you before because they were looking at reverse mortgages before? In other words,
no,
because in a rising rate environment, you definitely want to go with the annuities. In a falling rate environment, in a low rate environment, you want to go with
Let me,
reverse
that's a
mortgage.
logical progression. And in a perfect world of people with high IQs, it makes sense. But, but in the world of annuities where there's a horrific messaging from an industry standpoint, except for moi, what happened is people realized that there was more than one type of annuity. See, most people are walking around there thinking there's an immediate annuity, and if you die, money goes poof. That's insane, but that's what a lot of people think. They started realizing, wait a minute, annuities, plural, there are types that are like CDs. Boy, let's buy that because we can get a really good yield. I think it was a discovery of the consumer filtering through all of the crap sales pitches to find out that there are annuities that actually fit what they're trying to do. And a lot of people have enough money. My comment is, if you won the game, why are you still playing? They can live off the interest. They can lock it in long term and live off the interest. So, obviously the curmudgeon says, well, yeah, but what happens after year 10? Let's pick up the fork in the road at that point in time. But if you can lock in 5-6% guaranteed yield for 10 consecutive years and you have enough money, life's pretty good, right? So I think in the annuity space, it was people like me shouting down the indexed annuity gunslingers out there selling dreams, hopes, and upfront bonuses to say, hey, it doesn't have to be that complex. We're not against indexed annuities. We just sell them for what they are, which is CD products and income rider attachments if you need future income. But if you need to protect the principal and get an interest rate, that's a MIGA, period. Just like
I'm,
it's, I
I'm
mean,
kind of
so
against. I'm kind of against index
I
annuities.
understand
As a
that we use
journalist,
them as a
as a
delivery
journalist,
system. I understand.
as
I
a
understand.
journalist, I'm not really against anything, but how many times have I been to those dinners?
Oh,
How many times, when I wrote Stupid Investment of the Week for a decade, and
well, and you know me,
as
I use them only as a delivery currently in their current form. I use them as a delivery system for income rider guarantees when future income is the goal and the income rider beats the deferred income annuity quote. But with that being said, you are correct. The sales practices on the index side and the buffer annuity side is what needs to be cleaned up. But you asked the question, what happened? Were people going from reverse mortgages to annuity? No, they found out about annuity types that were never told to them at the Bad Chicken Dinner seminar. That's what happened. And then once they found out, they gravitated to it because there were such simple products and contractual guarantees that they could explain it to their spouse and loved ones, and they bought them in droves, period.
I will simply point out again, because I don't like to say that I hate any sort of product.
Sure.
I will simply say that I am on the record as saying that the average person needs an indexed annuity the way a moose needs a hat rack. Okay. I'll leave it for everybody else to figure out that joke if you can.
Well,
but that's, if you take a look at your finances and you can do whatever. And by the way, my favorite is going to those dinners and saying, well, if I wanted to do the same thing and get a guaranteed return, why wouldn't I put a certain percentage of my money into zero coupon bonds?
Right.
It'll give me a certain amount of money on a certain date.
Yeah.
And with the rest of it, I'll go buy an index fund. I'll keep my dividends, right? So I'm not giving up things that are part of my upside, and I'll get to the same destination with more money and less cost. That's it. A do-it-yourself index annuity.
You got it.
And by the way, when I was talking with my dad, when my dad was still alive, you're talking about the amounts of money that people get to. I had to have this meeting with my father where I basically said, Dad, here it is. You know that if you have this much money, you're set for life. So you have way more than this much money. So take that amount, and that becomes your don't screw it up money.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't screw it up, you could go buy scratch tickets with the rest of it. And my father never bought a lottery ticket, as never have I. But, you can do whatever you want with that money, and you're never going to want. And that, to me, by the way, is the real reason when people talk to me about annuities and then, oh, they're complex or whatever. I'm like, look, it's not that complex. But it's not that complex when you think about it from the standpoint of what it's doing for you. If you can say, I can wake up every morning and kind of do the Forrest Gump, oh, they told you didn't have to worry about money. That's one less thing to worry about. If you can basically say, hey, I can lock this in and know that pretty much whatever happens, I don't have to worry about money. The rest of my money can go up and down. It can do whatever. I can spend it. I cannot spend it.
Yep.
That's the value more so than the did I squeeze every penny out?
No doubt. Hey, what's your take on Bitcoin? I mean, we've had some, it seems like the political, and the media has kind of brushed some things under the rug, with Sam Bankman-Fried, guilty till proven innocent or innocent till proven guilty. What's your take on that whole space? Because it seems like it's not as big a part of the conversation, but it's still there. I don't, I'm not a Bitcoin buyer. I missed the boat. I'm going to miss it again. Um, what's your take on all that?
Well, okay, first things first, it's a much bigger part of the conversation in just the last couple of weeks because the SEC finally has
Yes.
approved what they call a spot Bitcoin fund. It can't really be a spot Bitcoin fund because to be a spot Bitcoin fund, you'd have to hold Bitcoin, not in like an Ether wallet or whatever. You'd have to actually hold physical Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's not a physical thing. So they had to get through that to be able to do it. But now you can buy funds that are tied to the price of Bitcoin.
What's your take on that?
Um, if you said you wanted to have an asset allocation there, I'm not going to argue with you. If you start to tell me it's a currency, it hasn't proven that yet. I think there's other cryptos that are more likely. Now, let me also, by the way, full disclosure here, Stan. I own $12 of cryptocurrency.
And you also have, don't
Wait,
you have like a ceramic Bitcoin thing that you were given a long time ago?
yeah, actually, I have it is, when you, so
Leave that to me in your will. Write it in your will. Sting
no,
gets that.
so that's actually one of my favorite things. Let me get back to that in a second. I have $12. I have $12 in Bitcoin, which is, I'm sorry, $12 in crypto, which is $10 of something called Duck Coin
Yeah.
and $2 of something called BBQ coin, which I was given, and I'm not planning to spend it all in the same place. So I've never actually checked to see if it's still worth my $12.
Can we buy barbecue with the BBQ coin?
More on that in a second.
Okay.
So, and yes, I do have, like they show you the thing that everybody thinks is a Bitcoin. It's the gold thing with the B that looks like a dollar sign.
It's on every story when there's a Bitcoin story written that you see this coin.
I have one of those encased in plastic that I was given. It is, as I like to say, a 100% genuine fake Bitcoin.
100%.
It's 100% genuine fake. It is completely real and not real at the same time.
Yep.
I use it. My hobby job, I officiate lacrosse games. And I bring that with me. And that is my coin for my pregame coin toss. What? And I ask the kids and their coaches, do you know what this is? And almost invariably, somebody gets it and goes, oh, that's Bitcoin. And I'm like, yep, this is genuine fake Bitcoin. And I'm going to point out today that at some point, I'm going to blow my whistle. And you're going to look at me and go, Mr. Ref, that's not right. That's not, no, you got that call wrong. And I'm going to point out to you that my call, like Bitcoin, is a currency that is determined by what the market makes of it. And you may think it's worthless, but when I blew my whistle, I can promise you, I thought it had value. And it did because I'm the one who makes the rules. Here's the thing about could you buy barbecue corn? Back in 2011, 2010, Bitcoin went on a tear. It went from $4 to $32 in a span of about 4 days. And it was the first time people were learning about it.
Right.
I made it the stupid investment of the week at $32. And I was literally just introducing people into it. Nobody knew what the hell it was.
Sure.
I will point out, stupid investment of the week. And it went from 32 to 3.5 in the next 6 days after I wrote that column. But I get people all the time who will say, they'll point out that column. They'll go to Twitter. Look at this guy.
Right.
If you had bought Bitcoin, okay, you would have held Bitcoin through Mt. Gox at that point. It was the most popular Bitcoin exchange before there was ever FTX. And people are going, Sam Bankman-Fried, we never heard of anything like this. That just means you weren't around when Mt. Gox collapsed because it did the same damn thing. And no, you didn't hold your money through that. But right after that story came out back in 2010, 2011, suddenly in South Station in Boston, there is a Bitcoin ATM. So I call my boss at MarketWatch and I say, we need to go use this. And he goes, where? And I said, there's a restaurant in Cambridge that has started taking Bitcoin. And my boss said, Chuck, you can't do the story. You just wrote a hate piece on Bitcoin, basically calling it stupid
Right.
investment of the week. You cannot follow up. I said, great. But there's people in the Boston office who can. He said, yep, go take them to lunch, do the Bitcoin thing. So I call my colleagues at the Market Watch office and I say, hey, who wants lunch? They all go, sure. So there's only three of us in the Boston office. So we are going to Thelonious Monkfish is the name of the restaurant in
And I'm a
Cambridge.
jazz person, so stop for a second.
Still exists. Worth it.
Thelonious
Doesn't
Monk.
take Bitcoin.
Nice.
Yeah, Thelonious Monkfish in Cambridge. Worth it, Stan. When you come to Boston, we can go.
Absolutely.
So I go, we meet at South Station. We put $100 into the Bitcoin ATM. We go there for lunch. We try to spend as close to $100 as we can. We turn in whatever we need to turn in to use our Bitcoin. And in the space of going from South Station to the restaurant, ordering lunch, etc., Bitcoin had dropped enough that our $100 was worth 64. So now we got to spend an extra $36, and then we have to go and expense it. And that's the really incredible part, because they're going, no, you took $100, you bought $100 worth of food. We don't owe you 36. And we're like, no, we bought $100 worth of Bitcoin, and the currency fluctuated so much that we need an extra $36 to pay our $100 bill.
You know where my brain went on that is the fundraising venture capital pitch on the ATMs that some schmuck put bunches of money into. And it's in some warehouse somewhere. There's a bunch of these Bitcoin ATMs that some schmuck owns.
Yeah,
and he gets what he deserves. No, but bottom line, it looks like it's survived the storm and going to be here in some form or fashion.
But I don't know that it's going to be a currency. Look, if you want cryptocurrencies, let's talk about cryptocurrencies that are usable, right? You have one. I bet you have one in your house, or you know people that have one in your house that you don't even think of as a cryptocurrency. It's called an Amazon gift card.
Oh, absolutely.
If you have an Amazon gift card, you could go to someone else and say, hey, I've got an Amazon gift card. It's worth $50. Will you take it? They will. And in fact, if you said, I only owe you 40, but I got this gift card I'm not using, would you take a $50 Amazon gift card? They most assuredly will.
Right.
You can have an absolute economy. And by the way, it is, for as much as people go, well, Bitcoin for crime and whatever, there's an entire illicit economy in this country, right? You talk about, there are people who will say, oh, can I pay that contractor in cash, right? Well, I can pay you with a gift card, and I can pay you with a gift card, and you can, think about it. You run a small business. I run a small business. If somebody wants to pay me in Amazon gift cards, I can use that, right? So you can have Amazon gift cards and other things like it are legitimate cryptocurrencies. There's not a well-expected secondary market. You don't have futures on it. You don't have other things that you do with crypto.
Is it just a toy for Wall Street?
No, I don't think it is, because I think Wall Street's still trying to figure out how to use it and what to do with it.
I agree with that.
And you have a lot of disagreement. I mean,
yeah. I don't know if was it Jamie Dimon or some, one of the big guys just like, they hate it. Obviously Buffett hates it. His ex-compatriot that just passed away, Charlie Munger, hated it. Not saying those guys are perfect, but they have driven a lot of the sentiment for sure.
Well, but Liz Ann Saunders from Charles Schwab said on my show, and it's the thing I come back to, tell me what problem it solves for.
Very good question.
If you say this is here to stay, tell me what problem it solves for. And what I compare it to is things like, go back to the early days of the personal computer, right? I am old enough to remember those days really well.
Me and you both.
If in the 1980s, if you were going to say, let me bet on a personal computer company, you would have been buying the stock of Prime Computer and Wang Labs and Microsoft you'd never heard of. And you weren't going to buy Microsoft. Correct. And Apple was this company that was out of those guys' garage that you heard a little something about. But you were going to buy the wrong things because you couldn't tell. I'm not sure that Bitcoin is ultimately the cryptocurrency. I think blockchain has tremendous value.
Totally agree.
You told me you want to invest in blockchain. You're buying the picks and shovels of the cryptocurrency.
Totally agree.
Fine. But we're not done having Sam Bankman-Fried type failures.
No,
it's not, You know, and so by the way, as long as we're talking about all this, right? Do you want to know? Because I broke it last year, but I'm going to write about it again this year.
What's that?
We're just about, by the time people hear this, we will know who's going to the Super Bowl, right?
That's true.
Yes. Okay. So you want the, um, there was a Leonard Koppel was the journalist, sports writer who created the Super Bowl indicator, which he did as a joke. And before he died, he sort of said, I wish I hadn't done it. And, it's the whole thing about with conference win and what it means. I'll give you the real Super Bowl indicator. This is it.
Let me hear it.
Any stock, any company that is less than 5 years off of its IPO or less than 3 years from having its IPO, if they are advertising in the Super Bowl, that company's headed for trouble. So in other words,
Oh yeah, there's a graveyard
if
of
you
those
want to know
freaking
what
companies.
not to invest in,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
do not take any public company that is newly public and advertising in the Super Bowl. Do not take any company that is so hot that it's going to go public after the Super Bowl within 2 years, because that IPO is going to go down in flames. And there is a long history. I've now gone back and done the research for this entire century. And there is a long history of it. And it makes actual economic sense, which is these companies have a hot IPO. They don't really know what to do with their money.
Right.
They go spend it on Super Bowl stuff so that their executives can fly their private jets in and go have a grand old time. Coca-Cola and Budweiser and whatever can afford image ads at the Super Bowl, but the other guys can't. And I defer to South Park. I defer to South Park, where their take on things on the Matt Damon commercials for FTX was, what did Matt Damon say? Fortune favors the brave. I know. We all invested, we all lost all our money, but we were brave in doing so.
Well, the other thing, I read an article the other day, a little bit kind of off subject, but it was about the private jet industry. And one of the stewardesses had gone, rogue and talked all about just some of the horrific things that they saw. And I'm thinking to myself, if I'm shorting stock, if my business was shorting stock, I would be researching these net jets and say, who's your worst actor? And then find out if they run in companies or if they're just went public. And I'd short the crap out of those people because they don't understand money if they're up there, going back and forth, etc. on a private jet.
I will tell you a funny story. So in my job, I am probably the only person who does not work for a fund company, who knows every one of my fund managers personally. If you run my money, I've met you, I've talked to you,
right?
I've done whatever, and I can arrange to do that. If tomorrow, if I wanted to find a new fund, I could call a guy and say, "Hey,
sure,
talk to me." So I know every single person who runs a mutual fund other than an index fund that I own, right? And at the same time, more than once in my life, I've heard things where I'm like, "Oh, maybe this guy drank the Kool-Aid. It is time to get rid of him." But I will tell you that I once had a manager who was coming to Boston, and it was a fund firm that I'm like, yeah, I really like what I've heard this guy say and everything else. At some point, this could be on my radar screen. And we had a reasonably bad snowstorm. And we were supposed to meet for dinner, and I probably should have been out driving in this. And the guy says, could you meet me downtown? Let's go get this dinner we were going to have. But would you mind driving me out to the suburbs? He's like, you live in the suburbs? I'm like, yeah, I do. Wrong direction, right? So he asked me to drive him out to the suburbs. He was leaving behind the presidential suite in the hotel that he was in to move into the presidential suite in a hotel that meant that tomorrow morning he could get to whatever his meeting was, right? So he was more than doubling his cost. And in exchange for my troubles, he spent way, way, way too much on dinner, because I would have gone to eat tacos. Like,
sure.
It's that. And I watched, and he talked about, he like reveled in how much he was spending. And I was like, I will never own your fund. Not ever.
I just think there's something to, I don't think you have to be as frugal as Sam Walton flying coach, but I do think that there's something to that. Last question, we're going to have to wrap this up in a few minutes, but does Wall Street like open borders?
I don't actually, that's a good question that I don't really have an answer to. I think that Wall Street likes what's good for business. And to the extent that they can say that open borders are good for business, come on. to the extent that you can say that, I think when you look at this question, the right way to answer it, and I haven't done the research to be able to answer it for you, would be to say, look at what the economists say on the subject, but compare academic economists to corporate economists.
Mm-hmm.
Angus Deaton, Nobel Prize winning economist, wrote a fabulous book that came out near the end of last year. And Angus was on my show, and we were talking about economists. And specifically, there is a significant difference between what corporate economists believe and what academic economists believe. And that ultimately, you very seldom have anyone not coming back to academia. In other words, the minute I'm no longer employed by you, my belief system miraculously comes back to what
Right.
the academics think. And the minute you employ me, I may move off of whatever. But, and admittedly, he owned up to the fact that he's an academic economist. So he has maybe a bias that he's living in the light and not the dark. But I would say that if you want to look at it from an economic standpoint, not so much a market standpoint, go find the college professors and compare what they're saying to the corporate economists, and that your answer will be somewhere in the middle.
It's just interesting. I don't trust any cable news either side. They're all agenda driven. News is agenda driven. So I look at it from a different lens. I was just wanting your take, and that's a really good take. I heard someone say the other night, and it hit me that they were correct, because one of the places I live part-time is in Florida. And he goes, I defy you to find a roofer that's not an immigrant that's working in Florida. And I went, yeah, he's probably right. I mean,
Well,
he's
I
probably right.
I would say you'd have a tough time doing it here in Massachusetts, and we don't have the same immigration issues. I mean, I'll also point out I'm first generation American. My parents were both born in Berlin,
Mm-hmm.
and my parents had, my parents both had pretty amazing stories that got them here, and what they had to go through to get here, and who had to sponsor them, and what they had to do.
Yeah.
And my parents would have told you that they were not in favor of open borders, but they, in terms of completely open, but that, again, what are you doing and what are you trying to bring in? And I will simply point out that when someone says, yes, but what they're trying to bring in is drug dealers. Well, in the case of my grandfather, in the case of my father's father,
That's not true.
almost certainly he was a drug dealer. Now, he would have preferred to say it was International Pharmaceuticals Company, like an international pharmaceuticals company, not like a drug dealer.
Well,
But
the
if
reason I
you
asked
wanted
that
to spin it, you could spin it that way.
the reason I asked that question was a couple reasons. Number one, I wanted to hear what you had to say. Number two, I wanted our listeners and viewers to think of it differently, not through a cable news lens. But I will say this: the only prediction I have about the elections coming up is that whoever wins the presidency will have the better message on immigration. I don't know what that message is, but whatever that message that they can craft to translate to the people to make them feel comfortable about it will win. That will be the issue, I think, because it has tentacles all the way around. And I think either party has the ability to craft that message. We'll just see. But I do think that it's not as black and white and horrific. It's horrific in a lot of ways, but it's not what I think the media portrays in a lot of cases. And I heard a pundit say the other night, and I don't agree with him all the time, but I think he's hilarious. His name, you know him, James Carville. And I watch him because he's funny. But what he said was interesting. He goes, if a lady walks 600 miles with her daughter to get across her border, I kind of want to hire her. And I went, that's interesting. Now I know all the other people on the other side are yelling at me right now, but I want you to think about it. Think about it a little bit. And obviously we're going to clean that up as a country. We always do. It's, it's not going to be the same, but I thought that was an interesting comment, because, I'm always hiring people. I'm always looking for work ethic. And when you said that, I'm like, wow, that's a good way to do it.
Well,
What
yeah.
other items do you want to cover before I wrap this thing up, Chuck?
Oh, Stan, it's your show. I mean,
All right, then here's what we're going to do.
Wait. There is one thing I want to
Okay.
point out, which is the last time you were on my show, we
Uh-huh.
taped a couple of things right before my wedding in November because I did some shows in advance before I went away. And at the time, I had you come in to do a question, which was not from the audience, it was from me.
I know.
Because I had been given a buyout offer on a small pension that I had.
Mhm.
And your advice was what I expected it to be, which was, like you can run the math and decide if it's something else, but chances are good you want to stick with the pension.
Mhm.
And I will simply point out I did run all the math, but more importantly, I had the conversations with Gail. Now I'll point out Gail hates money. Like among the things that she will tell you she's getting with me is the fact that, hey, he'll help me with the money decisions that he actually knows what he's doing. That's that
Right.
second part that really is perhaps more important. But we had all of the money discussions about it. And she kind of recognized that, like, it wasn't a sharp stick in the eye. It was easier to do it than she would have expected, even if she doesn't understand how pensions work or annuities work and the rest. And B, the peace of mind would have been worth whatever we could have done when we did the trade-offs and looked at it.
Right.
And so the decision that was made when we finished, her thing was, I thought we were going to have a talk about money, and instead we had to talk about life. And my show is called Money Life for a reason.
Man.
But when people are having those discussions with you, remember, like, the only reason my show is called Money Life is because life money sounds stupid. It doesn't roll off the tongue. Life comes first. Remember that, everybody.
We're talking with Chuck Jaffe. He's the host of Money Life Show, moneylifeshow.com. And it's called Money Life. But if you want to go and listen to all the re-recordings and all the stuff he has out and subscribe, I tell you to do that. moneylifeshow.com. He's also a columnist with Market Watch. I used to do that gig for a long, long time. It's kind of how we met. But at the end of every show, Chuck, as you know, I do a mic drop moment. I count it down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you say something that's so unbelievable that people will be blown away and walk away in amazement of your IQ. So here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, mic drop moment. Chuck Jaffe, go.
Remember, folks, keep everything in perspective where money is supposed to be. Okay. You didn't make it to save it. You didn't make it to be buried with it. The richest man in the graveyard is not the happiest man before he got there. So
there you go. I mean, that's a mic drop. Chuck, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us on all major podcast platforms and the Fun with Annuities YouTube channel. I'll see you next time. Take care.